Quincy Jones had once said when he moved to Los Angeles, he didn't know where Sunset Strip was, but he knew where Central Avenue was. It was the center of a new black America. It housed a young, up and coming black community and had a vibrant, pulsing downtown during the day along the southern corridor through South Central. Los Angeles in the 1940s was becoming a new nexus for the American experience. Immigrants and American migrants alike were flocking to the West Coast, looking for opportunity and the golden land that Hollywood made to seem shimmer on the Pacific Ocean coast. People came looking for work, acting, and then of course vice and music followed into that melee. Along with an urban, affluent white America came a migration of black Americans leaving the difficulties of the South and the harsh competition of the Rust Belt industrial East. Los Angeles seemed a land of promise, potential, without the conflicts that were rooted in centuries of the old America they had left behind. Unfortunately, things weren't that simple here in Los Angeles, and plenty of tough times lay ahead for black Americans, the Hispanics that were moving in, and as well as many white Americans looking for jobs. As the war was winding down and the new American Republic seemed to have been born, an optimism was often soaked with the realities of a change that hadn't quite reached all of America's people. In that mix of humanity, the music scene started to blossom in South Central Los Angeles along Central Avenue. Nightclub after nightclub popped up. A new sound had been born. Bebop was exploding in the post-war America. Many were excited by this development. However, some weren't prepared for the fury and urban expression that bebop had to offer. Many of the famous names in jazz spent time on the West Coast working with this new sound and this new scene along Central Avenue. Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie themselves took the train out west to play on Central Avenue and to be part of this scene. Anchored by Teddy Edwards, Dexter Gordon, Wardell Gray, and a host of other fantastic players, the West Coast had all these clubs that offered a place to get a cool drink after a hot day in the California sun. By day, Central Avenue was a pleasant downtown for the majority of black people in Los Angeles. It was middle class, respectable, and family friendly. By night, it turned into a dynamic, multicultural thoroughfare of music, entertainment, and mirth. The dizzy white lights are dancing daringly again, lightsome, lilting, laughter is tinkling from lips curved merrily in happy faces of white, brown, cream, or rich orange as the gay, many-colored gowns of women of all races flutter like so many tropic butterflies, remembered one LA resident. I'm reading this from Curbed Los Angeles, which is a website dedicated to LA and what's happening in that area. And that little bit was taken from the California Eagle columnist Harry Levette. He wrote that about LA Central Avenue in 1931. It's such a vibrant, new, pulsing region on the West Coast. There's this change is happening. The music's changing as rapidly as the neighborhoods and demographics are. People are following the work. Hollywood's arrival on the West Coast transforms the Los Angeles region. That really can't be denied. And with that new pulse of energy, economics and opportunity, always vice follows and short on its heels. Doesn't matter where you're talking or when in the globe. When there's a new center of power and wealth and economic and opportunity, all your proclivities of comfort will follow shortly along. And that included jazz in the 30s and the 40s into the 50s. Jazz was a big part of even the brothels and the clubs and the vice, and going back to prohibition. Jazz was the backdrop for all of this American history. And it's really quite something, the way we kind of flip over chapters of American history. A lot of things happened that we should be more in recognition of, but too much information, knowledge, and history would inform us too much about the present and would probably make a lot of our current agendas difficult to accomplish. But just like Kansas City was lawless in the 20s and the 30s, and the city saw a boom in real estate and development because the city was run by corrupt gangsters. And then they straightened Kansas City out, and real estate development ceased, the growth, and of course all the vice that Kansas City became famous for also became more under control and more pushed out of town. And LA is seeing this spark and this growth. And you can go back to the Wild West, the gold rush towns, the oil boom towns that we still have in America today, like parts of North Dakota, the Bakken oil fields. I used to live out in western North Dakota, 20 minutes from Montana. I lived there in 89, 90. When my parents first moved to America, they moved us to western North Dakota. Eastern North Dakota is flat, glacial, old lake bed, flat as a pancake. Great farmland, great siltation. The soil is really rich. The Red River Valley, a lot of great agriculture happens in the Red River Valley. You get to the western edges of North Dakota, the elevation increases. You're getting towards the mountain areas, but you're not nowhere near there. You're still in a higher plateau, but it's drier, and these badlands permeate throughout western South Dakota and North Dakota. We live right next to the Teddy Roosevelt National Park, which has a gorgeous badland rift area on the Little Missouri River. But that region was very depressed when I was there in 89, 90. The town had a population of 1,200. And with the resurgence of the Bakken oil fields in the last 15 years, the town has swelled up over 5,000 or something like that now. And with it came vice and crime and violence and more policing, and it just follows wherever the wealth goes. And so in Los Angeles in the 30s and 40s, there was just nightclub after nightclub offering entertainment. Places like the Dunbar Hotel. The Dunbar attracted people like Louis Armstrong and Ella Fitzgerald, Lena Horne and Billie Holiday. Goes back to the late 20s. And it became one of the most popular spots along Central Avenue. Inside the Turban Room piano bar, where guys like Art Tatum and Gerald Wiggins, who's a great West Coast player that has a lot of really good records and shows up as a sideman on a lot of great 50s LA sessions. I'm a big fan of Gerald Wiggins. Big bands like Duke Ellington and Count Basie would take up residence. Trumpeter Buck Clayton once recalled Ellington heard their record, "It Don't Mean a Thing If It Ain't Got That Swing," playing on the jukebox in the Dunbar restaurant for the first time. So it was an exciting place, and it kind of had its finger on the pulse of Black America especially, which is a very important aspect when we're talking and discussing jazz music. Next, there was Club Alabama, by far the most legendary of all the jazz venues on the Avenue. A glittering nightclub opened up in the 20s. It has a long history. It was called the Apex for a while. Band leader Curtis Mosby was there. It was the club Marcia Royal, who plays with Basie. I think he played with Ellington for a while. I love Marcia Royal. He has a great record on Urania. a fantastic alto saxophonist. It's just an interesting time and place. The fried chicken, the Chinese food, it all kind of mixed in, mingled in together. Over the years, people like Billie Holiday, Johnny Otis, Gerald Wilson would all perform at the Alabama. The great female trumpeter Clora Bryant. Remember Holiday babysitting her daughter while she rehearsed on stage. Uh, I'm not sure you want Billie Holiday babysitting your kids, though. She was a bit of a rough and tumble gal, although I'm sure she was a fantastic uh, rearer of children. I'm sure she'd love children from what I've heard. They also hosted comedians like Moms Mabley. It was just a great place for the black experience to feel comfortable and do what it wanted to do. So Club Alabama is another important spot along Central Avenue. Another place out on Central Avenue was called the Downbeat. Jazz flautist and clarinetist Buddy Collette uh, recalled on Central Avenue Sounds, man, it was jumping in 1946. And Buddy Collette is one of the great West Coast stories. He's a guy who has a lot of records as a leader, big part of the whole West Coast scene. He's often mislabeled as cool, and some of his stuff could be West Coast cool, but a lot of it's also quite up tempo and very modern, compositionally driven. It certainly just goes beyond uh, cool, swishing along West Coast jazz. Colette's a very innovative and brilliant player. Uh, that year, Colette joined along with people like Charlie Mingus and John Anderson, Britt Woodman, Oscar Bradley, Spalding Gibbons, and Lucky Thompson to form the short-lived Stars of Swing. I mean, you're just talking some real personalities. And of course, Mingus was a West Coast guy and kind of came in and out of the West Coast scene. Uh, Teddy Edwards once told the LA Times, everybody was there, man. It was a night to remember. Charlie Bird Parker made his return to the stage after a stint in prison here at the Downbeat, uh, after being in Camarillo, which was a prison on the West Coast. So Parker's quite uh, an integral part of the sound and the scene. He's the New York guy, but having Parker show up really kind of puts a validation to what you're trying to do on the West Coast. And him being there was certainly a recognition of the contemporary power of what was happening at the LA, Los Angeles Central Avenue scene. Elks Hall was another famous place. Ellington, Cab Calloway, Les Height, Count Basie. It was more of a family-friendly place. There was another place along there called the Bird in the Basket or Jack's Basket Room. It was more of a post-war era. A major place for jamming was the Bird in the Basket, the great trumpeter Clora Bryant recalled. It was a restaurant. There were tables with checkered cloths. It wasn't too big of a bandstand, but the atmosphere was tremendous. It was conducive to jam sessions because everybody came there and they were listeners. They had done their research. Regulars would listen for hours as tenor saxophonists Dexter Gordon and Wardell Gray did battle with their horns. Most time we'd end up there after a gig, tenor saxophonist Teddy Edwards remembered, and we'd play until daybreak. All the different guys, Wardell Gray, Dexter Gordon, Charlie Parker, Lucky Thompson, Howard McGee, Errol Garner, Hampton Hawes. It's a pretty well-established list of jazz royalty. Another place that was considered the West Coast Apollo was the Lincoln Theater. And a little further south on Central Avenue, you'd have stars like Nat Cole, Lionel Hampton, Sammy Davis Jr., just another exciting place. The Lincoln Theater was a big-time place for black folks in town, Marshall Royal recalled, because it was the first year that was run by blacks in that area. You couldn't get into that place on Saturdays and Sundays, just loaded. On top of that, they had probably 12 of the most beautiful black girls in towns as usherettes. Today, the theater is a church. The Iglesia de Jose Cristo Ministerios is the city of Los Angeles historical cultural monument. The local 767 is another club along the strip. Spike's Brothers Music Store. You have Jelly Roll Morton's Hotel. Of course, Jelly Roll claimed to be the inventor of jazz. You had Shep's Playhouse, which was at times a Kwafuka Japanese restaurant and soon became the hottest ticket in town with elaborate floor shows and floor girls The second floor, they had a cocktail lounge. On the third floor, where we played, they had a lounge and the dancing. The trumpeter and bandleader Monty Easter recalled. Eddie Haywood used to work in the cocktail lounge with Emmett Berry playing good trumpet, signaling the changes coming to jazz as it moved from the swing era to electric blues and bebop. T-Bone Walker played his electrified guitar during gigs at Shep's. And T-Bone Walker, of course, is one of those great transitional guys, taking jazz from the jump blues into the R&B era. Just an exciting player to be around. The magic only lasted until 1946, it says. When the Japanese came back, the blacks were out. And that was during the war, of course. The Japanese had been exiled. It all closed up down there in Bronzeville, so the place in Little Japan didn't last very long. But still, it's just such an exciting time. A place called Dynamite Jackson's, the Jefferson High School had concerts and events, Ivy's Chicken Shack. I mean, you're going further and further south now along Central Avenue, but it's just such a concentration of black new urbanity in America. And like Harlem Renaissance of the 20s, Central Avenue in Los Angeles was an epicenter. It was a cultural hub that was attracting some of the greatest talent in the music. And we think of jazz as being very New Orleans, Chicago, and then New York. But LA at this point really kind of ascends and starts to rival New York. And most of the West Coast scene, especially the cool scene, it was the white musicians that were doing that sound. These black musicians on Central Avenue were doing jump blues to bebop. You know, they weren't really a part of the cool scene like the Chet Bakers and the Jerry Mulligans and that whole diaspora of music. Chico Hamilton would be kind of one of the exceptions, but Chico, of course, is a chapter of his own, and he has a lot of different sounds over the course of his career. Central Avenue Jazz Park was a city park across from the Dunbar Hotel, a colorful educational mural created by the local community that features some of the most famous performers to grace the avenue, including Billie Holiday, Clora Bryant, Big Joe Turner, and Paul Bryant. Again, there's just a recognition along this avenue of the history of this great city. And it wasn't to last forever. And of course, South Central being built by the freeways of the interstate era post-war, it starts to become somewhat divided from the rest of the city. You have the one major freeway cutting through to the south, kind of cuts Central Avenue right in half. And these freeways had a really devastating impact on neighborhoods. It just tore houses down. It tore businesses out. The Christopher Columbus Transcontinental Highway, Santa Monica Freeway is what it's normally called. It just really kind of guts South Central apart. The fashion district stayed to the north on closer to the downtown. And by the 70s and 80s, South Central is the West Coast epicenter of hip-hop. And you have the bands like NWA coming out of South Central, including Compton and Long Beach and the whole West Coast. And so you can see how far the neighborhoods have descended from the upward urbanity and shopping districts of the 1930s and 40s Central Avenue to the crack and the gang violence that was affiliated with South Central by the time the 1980s had rolled along. America really abandons some of its people and some of its neighborhoods, and it's taken a long time for some of these areas to start to rebirth themselves. And some of these musicians, like a Dr. Dre, have actually been part of putting money back into these neighborhoods, which is a good thing. It is a necessary thing to establish growth and to rebirth the economics of your neighborhood. But there's quite a descent from what was happening in LA in the 20s and 30s along Central Avenue, and from where Central Avenue ends up by the end of the 20th century. But there's still a great musical heritage coming out of all of these decades, from the sounds of the funk era, the hip hop era, the jazz era, the blues era. It always had a music that was pulsing out of it, and still today with the trap and drill, rap artists coming out of L.A. Kendrick Lamar still coming out of that same area. It's pretty nonstop. Watts was always a big representation of the black community and the big Watts music festivals. It was quite a place for the black American experience to speak about its time in America, for good and for bad. But it's something we need to remember more as jazz fans was the role Los Angeles played. And we too often affiliate West Coast jazz with just being the cool. And that would be very much underselling the dynamics and the breadth of what was truly happening in Los Angeles at that time. So you all have a great day. I hope you all appreciate it. Dig some West Coast jazz. Dig into some Teddy Edwards. Dig into some Buddy Collette. There's just a lot of great artists. Dexter Gordon's work, Wardell Gray, who it sounds like Wardell might have been executed by the mafia. Didn't they find him in the desert? I don't know, something bad, like beheaded or mutilated. They messed him up. But drugs and money and the whole thing, it was a convoluted time. And bebop was a reflection of all that pulsing energy and vicious, rapid change. And if bebop doesn't represent vicious, rapid change, I'm not sure what does. This music captured the times it was made in, and post-war America was a crazy place, especially for the black community in America. And this music documents it. And it's amazing how many of us can gloss over it and not hear the struggle, not hear the pain, not recognize the sorrow. Great art can't be made with a silver spoon in my mouth. It takes a certain degree of struggle. The winners of the great wars write the history books. The losers of those wars get to make great art. From the Lord is my shepherd to public enemy, if you oppress me, I will find joy in spite of you. And that message transcends. It speaks to people throughout time. And if you want to make a music that will last, say something about how those who are in charge and are corrupt will get their justice someday. That music will always find someone who will want to buy it. Promise you that. Again, I appreciate you guys. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't. If you want to go to Patreon and support the channel with a few bucks a month, that's always appreciated. We could definitely use the support right now. A few of the coffee shop quotes we got for our contractors have jumped to the tune of thousands of dollars, including our plumbing HVAC guy. Over 6 months ago, we got our quote, and it's gone up over $4,000 since then. And that's really messing with our budget numbers. I mean, we're going to persevere. We'll find a way. But man, that's so anything is appreciated. We're not made of money here. We're certainly trying to do this on a shoestring a budget as possible. We certainly appreciate anybody who can help and pledge along. If you can't, obviously no obligation whatsoever. We still appreciate everyone who comments. I appreciate all the comments on that last episode. I think it was a pretty interesting piece of insight. And I think it's a lot of the people who didn't feel there was peer pressure are some of the ones who are doing a lot of the peer pressure. That seems to be pretty clear from a lot of the comments. But again, that's probably my translation of it. And we all have our own version of how things are. You all be safe. My name's Dan, the Jazz Shepherd. We'll talk to y'all soon. Peace.